Hello, everyone. My name is Mifra Batul. I am the Compliance AML and KYC Specialist at D&B Pakistan. Welcome to the first webinar that we're holding with regards to compliance and AML within Pakistan and GCC countries. With me, I have Felix Chan, who is the Business Developing Director at D&B. I'll go ahead and let Felix introduce himself for
Yeah, hi.
further. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Felix, and like what Mira mentioned, I'm the business development director based in Hong Kong, focusing on the compliance solution and third-party risk management data as well in Dun& Bradstreet. So happy to join today to talk a little bit about the compliance landscape currently we are seeing.
Thank you so much for joining us, Felix. Okay, so maybe we can just dive right into it. I wanted to choose this topic for today to be a little bit more generic, as well as something that everybody can relate to, given the world circumstances that we're in. So the topic of discussion today is sanctions. Felix, why don't we go ahead and just describe what sanctions is and how it actually works?
Yeah, sure. So sanctions in general is a way to financially isolate a target. So usually it's imposed by a government. So governments from different countries around the world are using sanctions as an instrument of like foreign policy. Sanctions can generally fall into three categories, which are target, sectoral, and comprehensive. So target sanctions, which means like we aimed at specifically named individuals, such as key leader in a country, top government officials, terrorists, drug traffickers, and proliferators of weapons of mass destruction. These sanctions often include the freezing of assets and travel bans where possible. The second one is sectoral sanctions that aimed at key sectors of an economy to prohibit very specific subset of financial dealing within those sectors to impeach future growth. Like some country, they will impeach like marijuana, some drugs and weapons, etc. And then comprehensive sanctions generally prohibit all direct or indirect import or export, trade brokerage, financing, or facilitating against most goods, technology, and services. And these are often aimed at regimes responsible for gross human rights violation and nuclear proliferations. So that will
Okay.
be a general overview of what sanctions is.
Thank you so much, Felix. And why are countries usually sanctions?
So most jurisdictions like impose sanction regimes, particularly to comply with sanctions imposed by the United Nations. So as expected, with similar goals in their application, there will be overlap in the sanctions applied by like different bodies. The major sanction regimes include like the mentioned the United Nations, European Union, and the United States. And different countries itself will also have their own sanction list.
Right.
And I want to focus a little bit on one of the best known sanction lists in the world, which is the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Controls, short-term OFAC, and
Right.
then the specially designated nations and blocked persons list. So, which is this SDN list containing thousands of names of individuals and business, as well as some aircraft and ships from more than 150 countries that the U.S.
Right.
government consider to be terrorists, international narcotic traffickers, or others like covered by U.S. foreign policy and trade sanctions. Under sanctions program administered by OFAC, financial institutions are actually prohibited from providing property or an interest in property to a sanctioned targets. And depend on the particular program, this might mean blocking or freezing the transaction, or it might mean like rejecting or returning the transaction back to the originator. If a financial institution is found to have weak OFAC controls or is engaged in activity which with an entity identified on the SDN list or sanctioned under any OFAC sanction program, actions may be taken, which include like but not limited to issuing monetary penalties, criminal penalties, and regulatory actions.
Okay. What are the latest developments that we're seeing around sanction regimes under the Russia-Ukraine crisis? That's mainly why we chose the topic, so let's get into that.
Yeah, so it's very unfortunate of this current Russia-Ukraine crisis, and yeah, and then in the very beginning of this crisis, the U.S. and the U.K. were very quick to impose sanctions, of course, particularly to Russia and some of the Belarus entity. And then in the days that followed, further
Mhm.
sanctions were announced in rapid successions by the US and UK, as well as new ones by the EU, Canada, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, etc. There are a lot of
Mm.
countries that are following suit. The common theme is the targeting of Russians, elites, banks, oil refinery industry, high tech, and military export. The US, UK, EU, and Canada also expelled some Russian banks from the SWIFT, the very famous cross-border payment system, which was disrupt the flow of money in and out of the country. So some key highlights I think I would like to mention include the OFAC comprehensive export control that severely restrict Russia access to military technologies covering semiconductors, computers, telecommunications, information security system, laser and sensors, which means like these company within these sectors need to pay attention whether their goods and services are being used by any Russian entities. And then the
I
second one
see.
is the U.S. Treasury Department issued bank restriction that further bar Russia from the global financial system, which I've mentioned earlier. And then it also imposed sanctions on 24 individuals and entities from Belarus, which is
Mhm.
a key ally in this crisis to Russia.
Right. Yeah.
For the European Union, there is agreement on further restrictive measures covering the financial, energy, and transport sectors, Dow goods, along with export financing and the inclusions of additional individuals to the watch list. UK issue all encompassing sanctions, including freezing the assets of leading Russian banks, plus prohibitions relating to military and dual-use goods and technology, provisions of military technical assistance, and energy and infrastructure related goods. So you can see a pattern here is that the sanctions or the policy imposed are very similar across all these Western countries, which means like the company that I mentioned in those sectors or financial institution need to really pay attention on how they are engaging with their customer or their
Mm.
suppliers. So also like Canada, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, like all take similar actions with various degree.
Okay, thank you so much. And can you just elaborate a little bit on how or what businesses need to do with respect to sanctions in general? How does a business get affected, basically?
Yes. So basically, we are seeing a number of challenges the business facing under these sanction regimes, especially with this new and rapid change under the current crisis. So the extensive nature of all those regulatory measures from different countries, combined with the speed of their implementation, definitely creates a significant challenge for business trying to understand the impacts on their operations. If the company is involved in commercial activity in the Russia and Ukraine regions or with
Mm.
Russian-based companies, it is really critical to leverage all the tools to review and understand the implication of these new restrictions, and to also map the direct potential risk exposure to the customer base or the supply chain. The biggest challenge is definitely keeping up with the regulatory updates, as well as taking into account the numerous watch lists that need to be compliant with, not only from a single nation, but definitely from multiple jurisdictions that I just mentioned earlier. A lot of countries are taking action towards this crisis. There's also the need to screen continuously or periodically because an entity not sanctioned today might be
Hmm.
in the future, or it's actually might be
Definitely.
tomorrow, as the
Right.
escalating restriction on Russia's clearly demonstrate this pattern. So some might argue that okay, they would just stop doing business with Russian organization or those from Belarus or certain parts of Ukraine because of
Hmm.
this crisis. But the problem is like the problem is that while it's potentially easy to spot majority or wholly own the Russian enterprise, it usually isn't so easy to find out the ownership structures of companies who Russians shareholding is 50% or less, uh, both indirectly or directly, of course. This is an
Mm-hmm.
important point which comes under sanctions ownership screening rules, such as those of the famous called OFAC 50% rule, which
Right.
states that we cannot do business with a company which has sanctions party making up 50% or more of that organization's shareholding. So other jurisdictions may have similar thresholds or similar policy, but generally they will follow this kind of calculation. So the challenge here is that unlike most other lists, sanction ownership regulations come only with guidance, but no
Mm-hmm.
official list to screen against. Like they won't be able to give you a list of all the shareholder or all the entity that have sanctions shareholders. So in order to effectively screen in this regard, we think companies need to turn to some third-party ownership database to help them to comply with these rules. So, for
Right.
example, in a analysis that done in Dun and Bradstreet, 7 major Russian financial institutions and 13 Russian firms that are sanctioned by OFAC have a total corporate family members of 16,748 entities spread
Mm-hmm.
across 21 countries. So you can imagine only
Yeah.
20 company, major company in Russia can have a lot of corporate family members
Right.
in across a lot of countries. So this underscore the need for beneficial ownership data and the importance of having access to corporate family tree data in uncovering the hidden compliance risks.
Mm-hmm. And so how do businesses or how can businesses comply with sanction screening requirements then?
Yeah, compliance with sanction screening rules really needs in-depth understanding of both the legal framework and the details for multiple jurisdictions. And the more operation you have in different jurisdictions, the more you will need to taking care of. So because of the complexity in keeping up with this kind of legal regulation, the update, it's critical to leverage all the tools and reduce the potential risk exposure to your organization. Some of the appropriate steps, I would say, include like screening current customers, suppliers, resellers, and all other business partner against the sanction list maintained
Right.
by like the government and world bodies. Definitely suggesting at least in the minimum, like maybe UN, OFAC, and some of the EU lists. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, in the case of Pakistan, maybe your local government sanction or watch list as well. And since there are
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of like what I mentioned, this to screen against, definitely automated screening or periodic batch screening are more efficient way to achieve effective compliance, depending on the nature and operation of the business. And then the second one is to really screen the entity against sanctioned ownership list. So not only the entity itself, but also to see whether they have any owner or whether they have any branches and subsidiary that are actually sanctions. And the third one is to accurately classifying exports item and technology that includes taking into account up-to-date country restriction and trade embargoes. So that I think will more relate to the local government requirement. So that's
Mm-hmm.
something I think the business in Pakistan will need to study as well.
Right. And so how can we help as DNB then in this case?
Yep, that's a good question. So, I would say I would like to point out some statistics first. So we have do an analysis that we find out there are 14,000 tier one and 7.6 million tier two supply relationship with Russian entity globally. So you can
Mm-hmm.
see like in a certain point, some company in the world definitely has a little bit relationship or supplier linkage with the Russian entities. So as a result, we are seeing the ripple effects of US, UK and EU sanction on Russian's company here. So Dun& Bradstreet has intelligence risk management solutions to really help business with their specific business needs. So leveraging our data cloud of more than 455 million global business, Dun& Bradstreet can help clients better understand how the changing business environment and linkage between Russian and Ukrainian owned organization and or the associated individuals will impact your operations. So I would say business can gain visibility in their customer and suppliers corporate linkage and ultimate
Mm-hmm.
beneficial owners. So a global view enable mitigation of emerging cross-border risks and which Dun& Bradstreet help link entity together in three distinct ways that I think is some valuable data that your business can different business can consider to uncover some potential compliance within their customer or supplier portfolio. So the first linkage will be corporate linkage that connects companies to companies. It helps identify like corporate subsidiary associated with the entity, like the headquarter, branches, JV, etc. The second one is the beneficial ownership that connects the beneficiaries to the entities. So it
Right.
identifies the entities or the persons associated with or benefit from the business directly or
Mm-hmm.
indirectly.
The
The
UBO
third
essentially, right?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
essentially is the ultimate beneficial owners. The third
Right.
one is very advanced compliance data, what we call the network intelligence that actually connects business, that actually connects people to company based on the roles and ownership of that particular person to expand the web of relationship of business globally. So this data set can really open up new areas of understanding for company resolution. So for example, let's assume like myself, Felix, own a company in Hong Kong. Traditionally speaking, you can only through like a Hong Kong local company registry to know that okay, Felix is a owner of this company. But you wouldn't know like whether Felix own other company around the world, like in the UK or in India or in Japan. But from our network intelligence, by searching the name of Felix Chan, you may be able to uncover what I have owned, not just within Hong Kong, but maybe in
Mm-hmm.
other regions as well.
Right.
So I think it will be easier for me to do a demonstration of how, for example, the ultimate beneficial ownership can really help you using a visualization.
Mm-hmm.
So let me
Of
share my
course.
screen here.
Yes, of
So
course.
basically, this is ownership structure of a very famous football club, which is Chelsea Football Club, based in UK. So if you have followed the news of the Russian and Ukraine crisis, you can definitely remember the owner of this Chelsea Football Club is actually uh, popular or what we call a well-known Russian oligarch, which is Roman Abramovich. Uh, he's actually sanctioned by the I think the UK and also the US uh, government, if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't mistake it. So by the look of this very simple visualization, when you do an entity search, you can already uncover whether this particular company is actually being owned by a sanctioned person, and then you can do your own kind of internal compliance adjudication or approval process to determine whether you want to still maintain the relationship of the particular entity or not.
Mm-hmm.
So a very short visualization to give you a taste of how Dun& Bradstreet can help you in this regard. So I think another good point besides just related to AML and sanction, I would really definitely stress the importance of supply risk management because business can avoid gap in this part and to reduce the likelihood of operational disruption using our Dun& Bradstreet solution, which offer business the tool to screen third-party suppliers, monitor, screen the suppliers of, for risk change, and provide alerts when potential risks arise. For example, in particular in this crisis, Dun& Bradstreet Insight can really help clients to gain insight into potential operational risks and disruption based on the location, industry, financial help, and connection to Russia and Ukraine, and
Mm,
really around their suppliers. The second part is to understand the ripple effect of all these sanctions regime applied by different jurisdictions on your company's supply chains. So to
mhm,
really maintain a good supply chain within your business, which is very crucial because, for example, you just take a Russian crisis aside, the lockdown happening in China is also affecting the supply chain as well.
right.
So the third one is really very basic, is to identify alternative suppliers. So in case there is really some suppliers that you deem not suitable to continue working with them, you will need to quickly find another good suppliers to fill in the gap, right? So there's something that we can also help.
Mhm,
So I think this is how this crisis evolved, and the sanctions, how this crisis have evolved the sanction program recently, and why we want to stress against the importance of paying attention to the sanctions regimes, and actually giving you a little bit heads up on also the supply chain issues around the supply risk management as well.
right. Yep. And I agree, wherever you are in the world as a business, it's always going to be affecting you what the who you're doing business with. And like you said, because of this specific Russia-Ukraine crisis, we're seeing a company that wasn't sanctioned at the beginning of the day, and then by EOD, it's been sanctioned, you know.
Yeah,
And the way that it's so rapid, the changes that I think any business would require some sort of a database that allows them to see the UBO and just be able to identify exactly who they're doing business with.
yeah,
Yep. Thank you so much for your insights and for your help with this webinar,
sure,
Felix, and I really appreciate it. I hope to have further discussions with you with regards to AML and sanctions and everything going forth.
sure,
Um,
sure.
I would like to end the webinar at this point, and we can continue on.